segment number 4, our fourth trip into the world of Sonic Youth. Now, we've done full bio of them before, so in the new format, let me go over the big points here.
Let's
Formed
do
in
the,
19...
the
Oh, yeah,
montage and
let's
the
do...
numbers there,
Yep,
John.
yeah, let's absolutely do that, yes. So, sorry, I completely got thrown off a little bit there, so I apologize. I think I'm like O for life, right, in terms of remembering to do the
No,
montage.
you're like 40, 60, 40 or something.
60-40? Okay.
Yeah.
So in the montage, you heard Dirty Boots, and now you're going to hear a little bit of Mildred Pierce.
Mildred Pierce.
Okay, Sonic Youth-GOO is what we're covering today from 1990.
And Sonic Youth's Goo comes in at number 87 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 6 in 1990, number 467 of all time. It is Sonic Youth's second highest album on Best Ever Albums behind Daydream Nation, which we covered last season. This record did make Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 358. And Sonic Youth is ranked number 53 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So there you go.
Got it. So Sonic Youth formed in 1981 in New York City. The members, for those that need to know, 3 of them were there from the beginning and ended the show. Thurston Moore on guitar and vocals, Kim Gordon on bass and vocals, Lee Ronaldo also on guitar and vocals. Steve Shelley was there almost the entire time. He jumped in 1985. Basically, the run of albums that we've covered has been the Steve Shelley era, and he is also there till the end. They would add people like Jim O'Rourke and other players along the way. We'll talk about some other people that were in and around the band at different times, but that group stayed pretty much solid until the end. Sonic Youth had a famously messy dissolution in the fact that Thurston Moore and Kim Gordon were married until they weren't, and that was basically what ended the band, and they have been pretty clear about the fact that they will not be reuniting ever. So they kind of did end at a time too, age-wise and music-wise, where it was starting to get to the point where I think they were entertaining it anyway. But yeah, that is not a band that's going to get back together, and they really haven't played on each other's side projects too. They're truly artists to the core, I think, that are looking forward. So their name comes from a combination of reggae artist Big Youth and the MC5's Fred Sonic Smith. So they put it together, and they do say that in picking that name, which I do think is one of the best band names ever, Sonic Youth, I do think it's a great name. It kind of like gave direction to their, like what their musical project was going to be. So they credit it to that. Couple things, that's a fact right there. Another thing would be that they actually, depending on whether you consider this album to be a part of their canon, they either have 16 albums or 15 albums, of which this one is either number 7 or 6, depending on if you consider an album released 2 before this, not Daydream Nation, but before that. An album, Chicone Youth, named after Madonna's surname, and it's a collaboration between members of Sonic Youth and Mike Watt. And do you guys remember what band Mike Watt was in?
Yes, from the Minutemen.
For the Minutemen, yes. So that basically is a side project it's a very interesting side project. If you think Sonic Youth is experimental, Chicone Youth is even more experimental than that. And there's a cover with Mike Watt singing of Get Into the Groove on there. So it's well worth a listen, but it is not going to be everybody's taste. I can tell you that. It's definitely more artistic. Famously, it got some pretty brutal reviews from people that usually like Sonic Youth and the Minutemen, but it is the definition of like an art rock album. So that is where that falls, and it's also this is their first major label album on Geffen. It was kind of a big deal in 1990 because that type of stuff still mattered, and the idea that the ultimate indie band, right, Sonic Youth, was signing with a major was considered to be a real interesting sign of the times. But it was actually the 5th different record label that they'd released an album on. They started on SST and had made their way through a variety of other record labels, Enigma Records, and at this point they are on Geffen, who, for them, wrote them a relatively big check for promotion to kind of make this the their big album, and that's why this is often considered to be the first of two, right, mainstream Sonic Youth albums, as much as Sonic Youth can be mainstream. Influences, I don't think are going to surprise you guys: the Velvets, the Stooges, Patti Smith, Public Image Limited. Glenn Branca and his guitar orchestra was, I think, actually Lee Ronaldo, I think, was in it for a while, and he had a record label, and Sonic Youth was the first band he ever signed. And they credit spiritually kind of their ethos, Minor Threat, which definitely, maybe not how they sound, but I get it, in terms of sort of the authenticity argument and energy and stuff like that. And Joni Mitchell, and not just Kim Gordon, all of them. But they have varied interest. They're musical omnivores, right? There's some that you'd expect, and there's some on the outside that kind of are on the outside that you wouldn't expect. The genres: noise rock, experimental rock, indie rock, no wave, alternative rock. They veer. Yeah, no wave is the one that they originally were in. Although the albums we covered, they were already considered to not be a no wave act pretty much by that time. So that's a genre that had a very short shelf life in terms of stuff. And yeah, as I said before, 16 total albums. This is pretty much the middle of their career, because they started in 81 and they ended in 2011. So that's 30 years directly. This album came out in 1990, so it's year 9. So I guess it's still not quite middle. So I guess earlier in their career, even though they were a very established act. They became big enough that they headlined Lollapalooza in 1995, pretty much because they were on the show, and everybody else who was on, it's like, yeah, Sonic Youth should, headline this. Kind of like how Kurt Cobain picked, a lot of people just would pick them to open for them, right, because of the idea. So, okay, so that's there. Now, I'm not going to go. I famously said, because, for longtime listeners, I love Sonic Youth, and these guys have not been as high on Sonic Youth. And I said the true test will be when we get to Goo and Dirty, because those are sort of the mainstream Sonic Youth albums. I was curious to hear what you think of this one, guys. An album I know very well. I believe first take goes to Matt on this one.
Yeah, so I'm slowly starting to like parts of Sonic Youth.
Okay.
And I think this continues, because I did like Daydream Nation, and I liked this record as well. I think with it's interesting, because I had a similar experience with this as I did with all of their albums. I think each of the 4 Sonic Youth records that we've covered, I think I've liked all of the first songs, and I kind of, and I liked Dirty Boots. I thought that might have been my favorite of the 4. That's a cool guitar riff. That's like a unique kind of goes in a little different direction than what I was expecting. And it's got a cool chorus. So I was like, all right, I like the first song, but what else you got? Because this could go downhill quickly. And I didn't really find it doing that for me. There really wasn't, there weren't any songs that I didn't like. It was more like some moments in songs that I wasn't as big of a fan of.
Like the
mostly
screaming.
like the second half of Moat, I think, was probably got a little, because half of it's just they're just going nuts on the noise, and maybe a minute would have been fine, but they went like hard in it, like 3 or 3.5. So I was like, okay, that's a little much. Maybe the very end of Mildred Pierce, but that was so quick that they were just screaming that I was like, okay, I could deal with that. So even the moments where I was kind of like not that into it, or wishing it was something different, were kind of fleeting, really, and they came back in, they had something that was more structured. So my complaint with Sonic Youth always has been, it's got all of the art and none of the not necessarily pop, but there's no hook, there's no catch, there's no like thing to kind of grab me in. It's just very off-putting, and as John has said, it's confrontational. This album's confrontational as well, but there's underneath some of that, there's a lot of cool riffs, and there's a lot of cool musical parts. I love the drumming here too, I have to say. Steve Shelley's got some really ridiculously cool drum fills, and I'm sure he's probably got that on other records that we've covered, but it just, because
spoiler alert, he does.
Yeah, because but this album, I think I was noticing it more just because I felt invited into this record more so than some of the other ones. And I'm talking mainly about Sister and EVOL, the two records that we covered before Daydream Nation. I don't remember offhand like the whole, because I know Daydream Nation was a double album, so there's a lot of stuff on that. That seemed to be, John, correct me if I'm wrong, was that album, would you say, is that a little bit more reserved and maybe mellow, and maybe this one rocks out more? Is that a safe assumption, or is that, would you say that?
No, I wouldn't say rocks. It's more linear, and thus I think because it has traditional rock song structure, it might feel heavier, but it's because they don't do as much of the long form, right? Which I think probably didn't feel as heavy as it was.
Could be, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have, like I said, I have to go back and listen to it. I remember a mellower, and I know they're not a mellow band, but a mellower feel to that record than this one. But I could be wrong. But I like this. I was laughing at certain, like My Friend Goo's kind of a goofy song, like
Yeah.
you know, Kim Gordon's, and Kim Gordon's, you know, like when she did a song like Tunic, that's a song that I kind of liked, and she does that thing where I've complained in the past about she's not singing, she's just speaking about corporate white male oppression, and you know, just kind of this, it's like a dramatic kind of tone that I've heard before with her. I heard it with Patti Smith, that sometimes can be like off-putting, but I was okay with it this time around, because again, underneath the music was doing enough for me so that I could be okay with that, you know. So maybe it's not so much that the fact that someone's just like talking like that or being a little over dramatic or whatever in and of itself is a bad thing. Again, if you can hook me in with something musically or with a beat or something interesting like that, then I'm gonna give you a little bit more leeway. So yeah, I gotta go with a thumbs up here. I did find myself liking it the more I listened to it. This was an album that I was invited to listen to it more, because I knew there was enough to hang my hat on, and I said, well, if I can listen to this, you know, 3 or 4 times, I think probably I'm going to like it more as I listen to it, and I did. I don't know if Sonic Youth, again, going to be my chosen sound of choice, or you know, a palette of choice, but I could see myself going back to this and trying to, you know, get more into it. There was enough here for me to enjoy. So yeah, I'm thumbs up on it. I can say some positive things about Sonic Youth now, and I feel good about that. So yeah, I'm starting to get it. I'm getting some of their stuff at least anyway. So yeah,
You're a Sonic adolescent. I'm gonna give this a mild positive review as well. This is the album I wanted to listen to more. I feel like this one got the short shrift this week just due to time, and I like it. I feel like when Sonic Youth is kind of a bit more, I don't know, reined in, and less art rocky or less experimental, I like them more, and I feel like this kind of splits the difference. I feel like they're still themselves, but there's something about the core of the songs that I'm responding to more. I didn't like this album as much as Daydream Nation, but I'm having a hard time explaining to myself why that is. I think there maybe the songs on Daydream Nation just kind of worked for me better in some ways, or maybe more accessible or something. But this has more, there's a lot that I liked about this album. I feel like it started out strong and kind of tailed off for me a bit. I think a little Sonic Youth goes a long way for me. And I feel like this is, I don't know, like by the time I got to like Disappear, I think that's when I started losing a little interest. But again, this was one I also wanted to listen to more. I think I had heard Cool Thing before, but that is the only one that has a really cool guitar riff.
It's on Rock Band, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's probably why I know.
John, I think, yeah. That's a song that as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, there was some familiarity there because of the Rock Band, and so like that was the one that I was gravitated probably most at first, at least. Yeah.
But I really like Dirty Boots too. I like the guitar sound on that. Tunic is interesting structure. I like when Kim Gordon sings on this album. I feel like that's effective. I didn't mind. I think mainly I've said this before on a lot of albums, but on Sonic Youth too, it's like the minor chords coupled with like the feedback is like really kind of the barrier for me. But I think on this, by the time they got to this album, it's you know, at a modest or manageable level for me, and so like the feedback doesn't really bother me as much. And then like on Tunic, it's feedback, but then it goes back to the song. It like comes full circle. I liked Mary Christ, the third track. It's kind of got this more like punk feeling to it. It's faster. That's the other thing too, is like what their sound is like slower in some ways, in a lot of ways, and more I don't know. It doesn't sound, I don't know. Mary Christ feels like a standout in terms of like the tempo of their sound, and I like that more. I also found My Friend Goo amusing for whatever reason. I paid attention to the lyrics a lot. It's just kind of a quirky song. I liked Mildred Pierce, and the screaming at the end just caught me off guard more than anything. It's just kind of a punctuation mark or exclamation point to the song. Mildred Pierce is a great.
You guys know it's a troll, right? Like that song is a troll.
Oh no!
By the band. Okay, yeah, that's what that serves to do on that.
Oh, okay.
Like before there was trolling, that was a troll.
Okay.
It was like they released it as a video, like for humor for their own, like, and did it. And they played it because it's.
Wait, which song are you talking? Is that Goo?
Mildred Pierce? Because
Mildred
it's like
Pierce? Okay.
it's like here's Sonic Youth going mainstream, right? So let's
Yeah.
write a minute and 15 seconds, and at the end turn into like Minor Threat,
Yeah.
basically.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, got it.
yeah.
That's a good movie if you haven't seen it, by the way, Mildred Pierce. And Scooter and Jinx, the feedback is kind of like got this alarm sound to it that was interesting, or it reminded me of an alarm in some ways. So yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this one. I liked it. I didn't like it as much as Daydream Nation. I wish I could have listened to it again. I feel like they're at this point, like I'm never gonna be like on the John end of like Sonic Youth. I don't think at this point there's gonna be some sort of key that's gonna unlock Sonic Youth's to me, and then it'll suddenly click. I think I like it more now than I did in the beginning, but in this album, but it's never gonna be like the band that connects with me the most. So mild thumbs up for me.
Okay, all the listeners who like Sonic Youth, you can ignore everything they said because, like, we'll talk about why they just continue to be like an awesome band here along the way. Like this, so we've done 4 now. We've done a 4 album run, and one of the things that's amazing about Sonic Youth is how they can reinvent themselves in a completely different format from the last band they were, kind of. And it's very funny how it's like, we're gonna make a mainstream album that can be mainstream and be played on the radio and MTV, but in no way sort of compromise our Sonic Youthness, which the degree of difficulty of doing that is way harder than people realize, because they kept all of their cred and edge and didn't do it. And that's why they're the coolest people in the room, right? And that's why the people like the Michael Stipes and the Kurt Cobains and all the people like admire them so much, because it's like, God, how can you keep like all of the indiness, right, and the art, and also make an album like this, which is undeniably filled with stuff that has pop sensibility to it, and alt rock. This is an incredible guitar album, and all Sonic Youth albums are great guitar albums, but this album, it kind of gets sometimes niched, and I think it's begun to be reappraised, even by people that are hardcore fans, because I think, once you get past this idea that all the silliness of like credibility and major labels, in the pop domestic age we're in now, that's all fallen away, and you can kind of just look at the albums as they are now, and you can appreciate that, Sonic Youth made a choice on this one, and they continue with Dirty, right? They're like, all right, we're going to try to write some more mainstream stuff. I don't think they weren't compromising. It's like, we just haven't done this yet, so let's see if we do it. So they write like Dirty Boots, which is like an incredible alt rock song, just with, you said guitar riff, but when we're talking Sonic Youth, there's not one riff, because you've got Lee Ranaldo and Thurston Moore both attacking the riff from different angles and with alternate tunings, which I love the alternate tuning choices. I think it makes them in their own way bluesy while being divorced from the blues, because blues is the only place you see this many alternate tunings outside of maybe, the Velvets or Public Image Limited, to stuff like that. That's purposely going for that. Tunic's song for Karen is a continuation of Kim Gordon's obsession with Karen Carpenter a little bit. It's all about her, and it's an interesting song lyrically. It's pretty much a like almost the equivalent of an obituary, like a walking obituary for her. Mary Christ is a Nirvana song, right? But probably an edgier one than what Nirvana wrote. Then you've got them, just bringing in Chuck D, and it's like, let's do cool thing, where Kim Gordon sort of goes full subversive, right? In a number of different ways, right? She's basically post-feminist, right? Bringing in a hip-hop artist. At that time, hip-hop was getting a lot of flack, right, for being anti-woman. So it's like they're calculated, but they're not, at the same time, which I love about them. And just through, we talked about the Troll on Mildred Pierce. There's all the Cinderella's big score has and Disappear. There's these incredible guitar riffs just all over this album. This album sounds, I know I keep saying it, but it sounds incredible in headphones. I get, if you don't love minor keys or off tuning, keys, and you are more conditioned, Josh. And conditioned sounds harsh. I'm not saying conditioned like, oh, you're not like. It just, if you don't like
brainwashed.
Yeah, but if you don't like the traditional rock, scales, right, and stuff, you're just never gonna like Sonic Youth, because the whole concept of the band, right, is to play in alternate tunings to see what the music can sound like different. And they veer into traditional song structures, but sometimes playing them in minor keys so they don't sound like traditional songs. And the feedback at times can be reined in and sound almost like a straight ahead rock song. It just becomes a part of a traditional bass line or a traditional guitar riff. And then other times it's expansive and almost does kind of like what a jam band does, right? When they're just going and playing like a long part, but they're just playing around with the feedback, because both of these guys were in guitar ensembles. So to some degree, there's the science part of it. I love all of that. I love the fact that it puts me in a place. I think Goo is extremely accessible compared to, I think Daydream Nation's accessible too, but I get why Sister and EVOL wouldn't be a cup of tea. I mean, they do plenty that's even more experimental than that. Luckily for you guys, because you guys haven't really connected with that, these are not the albums that we're going to cover, those albums. So, because they kind of revisit that again in the 90s later. But yeah, this is just such a good album. We listened to a lot of good albums this week. The Sinead O'Connor album, the Laws album. I like the Johnny Gill album a lot, but this is my album of the week because it's basically Sonic Youth putting in a master class of how to be both an art rock band and a mainstream indie rock band. And Dirty Boots is one of my favorite songs of the 90s, and I love their choices. I love their guitar parts. I think Kim Gordon as a bassist has evolved amazingly from being kind of just, a piece of the, like, she didn't come in like, Talking Heads, like Tina Weymouth, right? Like kind of, she was new, but she immediately had it. Like over time, like her function in the band, and to stand out in a band with these two excellent, almost virtuoso-esque guitar players is pretty amazing. And yeah, Matt, you're right. Steve Shelley is, if I made a list of the most underrated drummers in rock, like Steve Shelley is there, because there's times when he hits the drums so hard, like he's just killing the drums, and then other parts he almost plays it open hands like a jazz musician, and he veers in and out, and his presence, like you mentioned, it's almost amazing once you process he's there, because you're like, how did I not hear him initially? But because you're getting the guitar in the front and the different vocalists and stuff, and the loud soft, right, draws you to those things, and then the drums are just sort of there, and so it almost feels like it blends in, but then you realize, like, no, there's this whole other subculture of these songs that's the drums that are these amazing things. And I've listened to Sonic Youth so often that now I can hear him and it doesn't get swallowed up. But and that's why I love Sonic Youth, because they so reward re-listens. I don't know, I think I like them immediately, but they're also a grower at the same time. So yep, high thumbs up for me. This is an awesome album. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like you're the definitive word on Sonic Youth. You speak about them so much more eloquently than I do. I think it's
They're
just because
just-
you like them. I don't know.
They're not a band I have to try hard to like. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like they hit all the pieces. They hit my sonic palette. They hit my artistic palette. You know what I mean? The boundary pushing palette. I love the fact that they have multiple singers because it kind of keeps things fresh and that they're different. That one sings a little bit more traditionally, where the other is more spoken wordy. And
Yeah.
this didn't even really have a lot of Lee Ronaldo on it, but he's there. He's a different type of voice too, that stands out. But yeah, they really work for me, and they're great headphones music. So I don't know. I mean, we get Dirty still to go, and then I don't think we revisit them again until toward the end of their run when we do Rather Ripped, which I think has some similarities to this album. Dirty is its own thing. It's more mainstream, but it's coming from a different place. So,
Well, I like that direction. So, I wasn't. Yeah, I'm not down on this record at all. I think that it could even go higher in my estimation. The more they're definitely you have to. For me, this is something that I have to sit with for a while. The question is, how much do I want to sit with it, and do I want to sit with it?
I don't think you should have to force it though. You know what I mean? Because I think part of what it is you shouldn't. To me, you should want to revisit an album to do it, and if you can't, right, that's the boundary. So I'm not big on like I have to listen to this until I talk myself into it. Like
No,
you know,
well, I agree, but I don't have any desire to go back and listen to Sister or EVOL again.
Yeah.
But I could see myself going back to this or Daydream Nation, and so.
well, yeah, they are much more in your sonic wheelhouse. Yeah,
Yep.
that
And
I
that's what I
figured this. I figured this or Dirty. If you weren't getting on that with Sonic Youth, then it just wasn't ever going to happen because yeah.
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 So